The Game Boy Advance has a whole plethora of strange and unusual titles that make you think, wait, that's a thing? And among those titles are a bunch of first-person shooters in the style of Doom and Duke Nukem. Two of these FPS games are Ecks vs. Sever and its sequel, Ballistic, both developed by Crawfish Interactive. Apart from being FPSs on the GBA, what makes them compelling is the fact that they are tie-in games to an early 2000s movie by the name of Ballistic, Ecks vs. Sever, starring Antonio Banderas and Lucy Liu. And the first game made it to the market almost a year before the release of the movie. And the two have very little in common. According to an interview given with IGN, producer Tim Mawson stated that the only thing they were provided with was an early draft of the movie script. So when developing the game, they basically went on vibes, which explains why the game and movie are so vastly different, and honestly, the game is much better off for it. In it, you either play as FBI Agent Ecks or NSA Agent Sever, seen here on the title art. They don't really look like their movie counterparts here, and neither do the in-game sprites. And frankly, the in-game graphics in general don't really match the Saturday morning cartoon vibe of this art either, because, as this little blurb here states, it's an intense real-world FPS. The story about Ecks, an FBI agent who is deep undercover, hunting the rogue NSA operative Sever, while getting entangled in a conspiracy, is nothing too special, but it serves the setup well enough. Unfortunately though, the way the story is presented is quite underwhelming, as the framework, where your protagonist of choice gets interrogated, is about as compelling as one of those story cards in the first Doom game. But I guess it's kinda fitting, since the focus of these kinds of first-person shooters tends to be rather on the action and atmosphere than the story, and the action is most certainly there. Each protagonist comes with 11 stages, where you shoot your way to the exit. I must say, when I first played this, I was quite impressed by the graphics. You gotta know, this is the early 2000s, and you're playing on a Game Boy Advance, which is pretty much a slightly pimped up Super Nintendo. Anything 3D on a handheld felt impressive, even though the frame rate for them tended to be all over the place. And EVS is no exception to this. But in general, the visuals are pretty cool. Things may look a little muddy on a larger screen, but just picture all this on a Game Boy Advance in 240 by 160. There are some downsides, like enemies in the distance become very difficult to make out. And I gotta say, there's something a little off about the visuals of the individual stages. The first two take place in a warehouse, and yeah, the overall design fits. But once you get to the streets, the assets that are used make it seem more like a kid's attempt at recreating a street with houses made of shoeboxes. The enemy variety is not particularly high, but it's kind of hilarious that our FBI agent Hero Man is given a reason to only shoot cops from start to finish. It's all just in self-defense, according to the story. Despite murdering many people doing their job, the violence itself ain't too bad. There is no blood or gore, and the death animations are also fairly simple. Enemies just fall over and die. Sadly, the sprites of the enemies sometimes don't match the weapons they're carrying. For example, the cops/security guards are always seen carrying a pistol, even when they're holding a shotgun. And you yourself don't have a reload animation when changing your magazine. I understand they may not have had the time or budget to animate it, but maybe just moving the hand off screen could have been possible? But what do I know? One slightly weird thing in this game, you know how most of these shooters have some form of melee attack, like Doom Guy's punch or Duke Nukem's kick, which come in handy when you're out of ammo? Ecks vs. Sever doesn't have anything like that. Instead, you can technically never run out of ammo for your handgun. But what happens when you're out of extra magazines is that you have to reload after every single shot, leaving you open for enemy fire. So you shouldn't waste ammo. There's one more thing I'd like to criticize in the presentation department, and that is how quiet the game is. There's no music during gameplay, and the only things you hear are the sound of your guns blasting away lawmen and their death rattle. Speaking of death, when you die in the game, you have to start the current level from the beginning. There is no saving in the game, and the only checkpoints given are at the start of each stage. The only way to continue playing after turning the Game Boy off is using the archaic system from days of yore known as passwords. As your health and weapons reset at the end of each stage, and as the stages themselves are also fairly short if you know what you're doing, this isn't too much of a problem. At least in the earlier stages, if you ask me. Also, each of the passwords of the Ecks campaign starts with the letters EX. So you can have fun trying to figure out which words with that prefix throw you into a level. The individual campaigns for Ecks and Sever don't play super differently, as you are technically in the same level, just on a different route, and with different weapons. There are some differences on how you have to approach the level. Like when playing the streets as Ecks, you have to use a sniper rifle to shoot at Sever to get her to run away, while when playing the same stage as Sever, you have to crouch a lot while throwing grenades at Ecks. The grenades physics kinda suck, by the way. The first couple of stages are fairly easy, but I want to say that from stage 5 onwards, the difficulty goes up exponentially, and that's when I wish that there were some checkpoints. This stage here, in my opinion, marks the point where things start going crazy, and the game is even trolling you. You enter a bar, and there is only one single cop firing at you. And cops are basically the easiest enemy type in the game. Once you kill him, things go off the rails, as you are suddenly swarmed by dozens of tough-as-nails SWAT guys, and you have to kill each and every one of them to beat the stage. And I'm not sure if it's just me, but I feel Sever's campaign is even harder than Ecks's. So beating this game requires quite a bit of patience. All in all, Ecks vs Sever wouldn't be anything too special if it wasn't on the GBA. But I like it, and I recommend it. More so than the Ecks vs Sever movie, which, quite frankly, is not very good. I apologize for the tangent that I'm about to embark on. I regularly get together with friends to watch bad movies. A couple of weeks prior to writing the script, we met and watched Lawnmower Man 2, Cybernator, Spookies, and Ecks vs Sever. 3 of these movies were quite boring. One of these 3 was Ecks vs Sever, and while it was probably the most competent movie on a technical level that we watched that night, it was also the least interesting. The acting wasn't that bad, the special effects were okay, but everything about it was just so bland and boring. Compare that to Cybernator, a 90s wannabe Blade Runner ripoff with zero budget. This movie was also boring as heck, but just look at it. Look at how amateurish everything about it is. Just like this one random dude here is more fun than most of Ecks vs Sever. I mean, Ecks vs Sever also has a couple of jarring moments, like this one here, where a random SWAT guy falls off the roof in slow motion, and for whatever reason we have to watch him die for 1,000 years, but moments like these are few and far between, and ultimately just make it a slog to watch. Maybe they should have used the earlier draft of the script that the game was based on. I'd say at best it's the kind of movie that you randomly watch on TV at 1 AM in the morning, when you're tired, but you don't want to sleep yet, but you don't want to use your brain either. If you want to watch a bad movie that is extremely entertaining, watch Spookies. It's a nonsensical horror movie that is just fun from start to almost finish.
Happy birthday, Billy.
What is also more impressive than the movie is the game's sequel, Ballistic: Ecks vs Sever, also known as Ecks vs Sever 2: Ballistic. While I was quite impressed with the first title, this one had me very impressed. This time, you have detailed and varied environments, from mansions to Middle Eastern market squares, more character sprites, more enemy types. And it wasn't just the graphics that impressed me. They improved and added on pretty much everything. In general, there is just so much variation when it comes to the mission structures. Even the 2 protagonists look more like their movie counterparts. While the first one usually played like get from A to B, kill all enemies, here you actually have stuff to do and explore. In Ecks's very first mission, you have to find the secret entrance to a mansion. And in order to do that, you have to dive through water. It blew my mind when I realized I could do that. There are missions where you have to rescue hostages. While there's still no music, there are little barks by the enemies in terms of speech samples. There's just so much going on. Also, you finally get a melee attack. They even improved on the storytelling. You now have in-game dialogue sequences. Granted, overall, I have even less of a clue about what's going on than in the first game. And to be honest, I have no idea why it's even called Ecks vs Sever, since Ecks and Sever are never even in the same room together. But that is fine. This is not a story-focused game. Unfortunately, with all their improvements also come some downsides. As cool as many of these new features are, it seems like they've been trying to do too much. For example, as I mentioned before, there are missions where you have to rescue hostages. Unfortunately, it's not enough to just kill their captors and then interact with them. No, you actually have to get them to follow you to a safe zone. And the pathfinding for these guys is less than ideal. They get stuck on pretty much everything. And trying to get them unstuck and then follow you again is a pain in the ass. I feel they should have just gone the Turok 2 route of the dissolving little girls here.
Child rescue.
Thank you, Turok.
Also, friendly fire is a thing, and killing hostages and civilians will fail your mission. And 1, these guys ain't the brightest and will run into your line of fire. And 2, on the small screen with that resolution, it can sometimes get difficult to tell friend/rando from foe. A save feature is still nowhere to be found, and this time I feel the lack of checkpoints is a little more frustrating, because the levels aren't as straightforward or short, and this is not an easy game either, so the lack of checkpoints or save system is quite a shame. And I gotta say, as much as I appreciate that Ecks' and Sever's campaigns are so vastly different, I found Ecks' campaign a lot more fun and interesting. Sever's campaign, after the first couple of missions, gets visually uninteresting as you're basically just running around in caves and military silos. But one of the biggest frustrations I had was actually in the very first Ecks stage. You're supposed to find the secret entrance into the manor, as I mentioned before. And after searching for ages, I found this little hole to crawl through, which led into a ginormous maze. But what do you get after finding your way through that cruel joke of a labyrinth? A cheat code. So this whole thing just feels like a giant troll move by the developers. The actual secret entrance is in one of the fountains. It was a rather infuriating experience. However, I still think that Ecks vs. Sever 2 is a wonderful little title and definitely deserves some attention, purely from a technical standpoint. Nowadays, the Ecks vs. Sever franchise, if you want to refer to it as such, is pretty dead, probably due to the movie being a giant flop. There was a PS2 game in the making as well, which eventually got cancelled, and all that remain of it nowadays are a couple of screenshots online. In summary, are Ecks vs. Sever 1 and 2 great games? Probably not, but there is something about them. The first one is very easy to get into because it's so straightforward with its action, and the second one is just kinda remarkable for how ambitious it is. Replaying them now, I actually got strangely absorbed by them, more so than I did when I played them back in the day. If you don't mind the occasional frame rate issues too much, and can live with a bit of clunkery, I recommend them. Especially the second one. The fact that these games are first-person shooters on the GBA, and that they're far superior to the incredibly unremarkable movie that they're based on, is what makes them oddities. Advanced oddities. And they're pretty cool. Just don't watch the film, unless you're a fan of the games and a connoisseur of bland action flicks. But I'd be curious to hear from you. Have you played the Ecks vs. Sever games? How did you like them? Did you get lost in that stupid maze in the first Ecks stage of the second game? Do you think the movie's a misunderstood masterpiece? Let me know in the comments. That's all from me. If you liked this video, leave a like. And if you want to support me, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and I hope you have a lovely day. And watch Spookies!